Welcome to ThinkTech on OC16, Hawaii's weekly newscast on things that matter to tech and to Hawaii. I'm Duke Oishi.
And I'm Maria Kashem.
In our show this week, we'll take a look at West of Asia, at the recent hostilities between Israel and Gaza, and how they relate to other events and relationships in the region.
These events are important to Hawaii because instability is likely to affect the cost of our oil and thus our economy.
So many questions are raised by the recent events in the Middle East. Will the truce hold? Already there have been deaths. While the Palestinians in Gaza celebrate and shoot their guns in the air, the mood in Tel Aviv is somber on whether the truce will hold.
How will the terms of the truce play out? Many issues were left on the one-page truce agreement for further negotiation. Will the Palestinians be able to rein in further Palestinian rocket fire? When and on what terms will the Israelis relax the blockade? What does the truce mean for the Arab Spring, or as some now say, the Islamic Spring in the region? What does it mean for Hezbollah in Lebanon and for Iran as Israel's arch-enemy, sworn to destroy it, and a supplier of weapons to both Hamas and Hezbollah?
What does the truce do for President Morsi of Egypt? Will Egypt be the guarantor of the truce? Is it now a new peacemaker in the Middle East? Only a day after the truce went into effect, Morsi took unilateral steps to enlarge his own power in Egypt, provoking protests in the streets of Cairo. What else will he do in the wake of these events, and will he be able to maintain his newfound position in the region?
The making of this truce, however effective, represented a new level of collaborative diplomacy involving the United States, Egypt, Israel, the Palestinians, and the United Nations. What can we learn from that interaction?
The assassination of that military leader, I guess it was a Hamas military leader in Gaza a few weeks ago. Was that, is this part of Israel's attempt to stop the rockets that the Hamas has been
that
sending?
happened
up?
before the rockets started.
No, but there were rockets from time to time before.
Yeah, right. I mean, Israel is very much interested in establishing its deterrence, making sure that nothing happens involving the confrontational parties that are going to jeopardize Israelis' inordinate predominance, military predominance in the region.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you recall, back in 2006 when there was a military conflict between Hezbollah and Israel, Israel responded with the same intensity, bombed the heck out of Beirut and that area. So Israel's response has been to, make sure that its military arms is flexed and the Arab side understands the potency of Israeli power. In order to be fair, Hamas is not exactly made of peace. It is a confrontational organization. United States and Israel call it a terrorist organization, and EU call it a terrorist organization. That is part of the problem in the sense that because Hamas is labeled as a terrorist organization, there has been no attempts on the part of the United States to talk to Hamas directly. In fact, we talked to Hamas via Egypt. Israel talked to Hamas through Egypt. At the peak of this latest crisis. The speculation is that Netanyahu wanted this conflict to really break Hamas's back, and then turn around and tell the Israeli voters, look what I have done. That becomes a good reason for me to remain prime minister, and good reason for my party, the Likud party, to be in the majority, for next X number of years.
Do you think that worked?
No, of course not.
One thing that struck me on NPR, they had some interviews of people on the street in Tel Aviv right after the truce was made, and people were not particularly happy with it. They thought it was going to unravel very quickly, that it wasn't exactly what they had in mind.
Right.
And they felt that Netanyahu should have gone further to make his point. And that was the common citizen. That wasn't anybody in the military or the government.
No, if he could, he would have. Believe me, because Netanyahu has absolutely no sympathy for giving Hamas one more day of existence, allowing Hamas to exist for one more day.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact of the matter is, Hamas is too resilient. It's not militarily. There's no match between Israel and Hamas. It's not even a regular army. It's not even a ragtag army. But in this day and age, when the entire world sees Hamas, despite all the intensive bombing on the part of Israel, was successful in lobbing hundreds of missiles. Hamas's prestige in the world at large, and especially in the Arab world, is all-time high. The fact that Israel opted for a ceasefire from an organization which it calls a terrorist organization, and the fact that the United States opted to have a ceasefire negotiated with Hamas via Egypt, with active blessing and enthusiasm on the part of the United States, speaks volumes about the transformed environment of the Arab Middle East in the aftermath of the Arab awakening or Arab Spring.
The fall of Mubarak was a problem for the State Department. He'd been their friend.
Yeah.
He'd been an important ally in the area, and when he lost power in favor of the Muslim Brotherhood, that really pulled out some benefit.
Yeah, in fact, it's very interesting that the Muslim Brothers, basically the uprising in Egypt was a secular uprising. Of course, most of the Egyptians are Muslim,
But the uprising itself was
secular.
It was where the Arab Spring began, in a sense, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, Tunisia, and then and then of course Egypt. But Egypt is the center of the Arab world.
Yeah.
Politically, economically, culturally, and so forth, even up till now, in all its weakness at this point. But the problem is that it was a secular uprising, and there were Christians in the uprising, because in Egypt has about 8 to 10 million Christians out of 83 million people. So there's a sizable minority of Christians, and they were, in their majority, part of the uprising. And in fact, what would happen to protect themselves, the protesters in Tahrir Square, which is Liberation Square, from the security forces, when the Muslims would be praying, they would have security, Christians securing the area, And when the Christians pray in the midst of Tahrir Square, the Muslims would secure the area. So, you see, but the Muslim Brothers, that political organization, was not there, because during Mubarak's time, they have always been playing footsies with Mubarak, and in fact, sometimes he would be angry at them, so he would block the parliamentary process so that not as many of them would be elected to parliament, etc., because it's all corruption and unfair elections, etc. But they were always playing, with Mubarak. To the point that one guy, yesterday, was asking one Muslim brother, tell me when, at any one point, were you against Mubarak when he was in power? He couldn't answer him because they were
together.
Yeah. So this is the interesting part. But Mubarak was smart also, because he knew that they were the organized one. Instead, give him like a few crumbs and so on to keep him happy, So he was smart in that, but that didn't help him in the end because of the secular uprising.
So what's interesting is Mohammed Morsi, and we can talk about the aftermath in a moment, but he gets in as a broker for peace, and presumably the Islamic Brotherhood is with him on this, and they are now elevating Morsi to a diplomat in the area, even a statesman, who is trying to negotiate peace between two factions that are about to get into a land war. And he becomes a hero, no?
Well, a hero to some people, I mean, the Americans praised him, for instance. His backers, followers, praised him. The Hamas, which is Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza and Palestine, of course,
Hamas is Muslim Brotherhood?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, they were formed after, they were patterned after the Muslim Brothers, and they have these connections because Gaza is right there.
Okay.
And they're like spiritual leadership, etc., from the Muslim Brothers in Egypt. But also they had like Sheikh Yassin, who was also the spiritual leader of the Hamas in Gaza.
So why would Morsi?
He was assassinated anyway by the Israelis. Yeah.
Why would Morsi want to save the area from? I mean, wouldn't his perspective and the perspective of the Muslim Brotherhood been to have a fight? Let's have a fight and see what kind of damage we can do and how we can excite people, and make them even angrier than they are. Why wouldn't he do that? Wouldn't that be the kind of expected track of it?
Yeah, I mean, one would expect that if you read like their literature, etc., and the place of Palestine in their literature and so forth. But these guys are pragmatists and realists, and they are wanting power. Okay, not power only in Egypt, but power across the Arab world at least. So they want power in in Syria, in Libya, in Tunisia, etc. From what you can see developing now, you see that there is some kind of rapprochement between the Muslim Brothers and the Americans. And so long for the Americans, you can be in power, in Egypt, so long that you maintain the peace treaty with Israel, and help us in doing certain things in the Arab world, so that we can give you a loan from the IMF or the World Bank. And that's exactly
economics
what's
at the end, right?
So that's where they are. But an interesting thing is how come these guys came to power. I mean, that's very interesting.
If the Arab Spring was a completely secular kind of experience,
absolutely.
how did that happen? Yeah.
Well, because the Arab Spring, secular, yes, but it was headless. There was no leadership in it.
Israel is a country the size of New Jersey. We have 8 million people. I told you that Gaza is the size of Lanai. They'll soon have 2 million people. You have the West Bank, not too populated by Arabs. I mean, they don't have a high rate growth. That's the other side of the Palestinian population. All these pressures for space are not going to get better. And Israel had the choice, when we had a different kind of intellectual or philosophical thinking about our directions, had the choice of staying democratic. I mentioned this to you before. It wasn't just a slip of the tongue. Israel will become less democratic because I don't see the two-state solution since neither side is pushing it. It's not only Israel, it's also the Palestinians, because where are they going to go? How are they going to connect with Gaza? How are they going to be one country? Hamas is not giving up the idea of getting rid of Israel, But again, reality may change. You wait a long enough time, new generations come, new realities. But the constraints of a small living space that the Gaza population, I think we're all attacked with pressure. Will the Gaza population themselves slowly become more aware, more educated, and do something? I don't know. They have, unfortunately, the Hamas is not the only ruler in Gaza. There are 3 other groups. So it's not like we're talking about a monolithic. The same as when we talk about Israel, we're not talking monolithic. The same as we talk in the West Bank, we're not talking monolithic. It just seems, from the outside, unless you go into depth. And in the West Bank, for instance, I think there was one person in the Palestinian population who could unite the Palestinians. And I think there's one person who, if it wasn't so unsavory in political terms in Israeli politics, he could make a peace with Israel. And his name is Barghouti. Barghouti is in Israeli prison for 170 years for a terror act. But we have released a lot of people who are in prison. We won't release him because he's the most popular person. And he is one of the original fighters with Arafat, but he spent enough time in Israeli prison. He speaks fluent Hebrew. He knows Israeli law. He knows his business. But he could make a peace. But then the Israeli government would fall, and I don't know if you'd have in Israel between the right and the rest of the country, because the price for peace with two-state solution is a heavy price for Israel to pay.
What effect does that resolution in the United Nations have on anything?
Oh, nothing. Well, there's only one small thing. A small thing. Being an observer nation, you can bring things to the International Court of Justice, and so they would try to get Israelis arrested for war crimes. But since they committed a lot of war crimes too, it's a two-way street. So, I don't see them using this as more. This is an intellectual argument. I don't think it's a realistic argument. Every once in a while, we do have European countries that, on the basis of one law or another, tries to arrest ex-Israelis, chiefs of staffs, or ministers of the government who traveled through Europe. So it happened recently in England. England changed the law after that because they realized it's ridiculous. You're going to arrest the prime minister, when he comes on state visit. So, but I think that I don't see a fast solution. No, one of the things you learn when you live in the Middle East or in the Muslim world is don't try to make sense of anything, not in terms of the perspective that we have. It doesn't make sense. It makes sense to the players. It makes 100%. Everybody, from their perspective, is right, and they are. But if you look in terms of the global perspective, in terms of the values that we try to project, and again, America is not Europe, but if we try to project American values, European values, third world values, the third world will probably have the closest understanding of what's going on and have almost no expectation. But the Europeans include this moralistic kind of superiority because we've been around longer than America and the rest of the world. We know what's going on and this should be done this way. America comes from the Protestant ethic, how they look at things, but those things don't apply in the rest of the world. That's only it. So I'm optimistic that we'll get through this year, maybe next year, the following year. Just have to live and take it step by step.
You think the truce will hold?
Probably not, but we hope that it'll last longer. But I don't think I think that on the Waikiki Beach we won't have much to worry about.
Thank you, Rafi. What led up to this? What were the elements, the forces in play that made this confrontation happen?
Well, this is a great question, and I'm glad you asked it. I often like to say about events in Israel and the Palestinian territories that a lot depends on when you begin telling the story, on where the first line is. You said that the confrontation began to be in the news about 3 weeks ago, and that in of itself is very telling because, in fact, this problem began much long before that. I mean, at the very least, what made the news 3 weeks ago was that Israel began to deal with rockets that had been fired into their territory for weeks and months, really, without much news coverage. So the Hamas was showering the southern Israel with rockets, undirected rockets, but still rockets that hurt and killed and endangered and terrorized. And that wasn't in the news. When Israel began to respond to this, to their own citizens being threatened, then all of a sudden it became newsworthy. And it became newsworthy in particular because Israel seemed to be dealing with it successfully. Israel began to target missiles and to target missile batteries, which sadly were located in areas that often led to civilian casualties, which is not uncommon.
If you put the missile battery in the middle of a civilian neighborhood, what do you think's going to happen?
Exactly, and it's this is one of those things where the world somehow has come to accept this as being normative, and it continues to astonish that a group that claims to protect its citizens goes out of its way to endanger its citizens by putting missile batteries in civilian neighborhoods and things like that.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So here we have a response. And we have the possibility of a ground war, a land invasion, so to speak.
Right.
And Netanyahu is ready to go.
Right.
A lot of people in Israel ready to go. They had accepted that as the reality. Enter the peacemakers. Why did they come in? What was their agenda? What were the forces driving them?
Well, I think everyone is concerned that there be that loss of life and an escalation in the conflict, and I think everybody, including Israel, I don't agree that Netanyahu wanted to launch into a ground war. I think that was the last thing they wanted to do. They wanted to what they wanted to do was end the rockets. Israel's wars are, it must be remembered, defensive wars. Israel does not seek war. It responds to provocations. So what they wanted was to end the provocations, and though they sacrificed a great deal in this so-called ceasefire, what they got, the main thing they wanted, which was the rockets more or less to stop. The rockets didn't really stop, but they stopped. They were reduced to a manageable level.
So what was in it for Egypt, for Morsi? Why did he want to be a player? Why did he step forward and try to make a peace?
Well, I think that you already, the answer to your question was in your question. I think Morsi does want to demonstrate that he is a player in this, that he can exert a positive influence. We'll see. Morsi's having his own trouble now in his own country, and we'll see where that leads. But I do think that it is in Egypt's interest and in Morsi's interest to keep the peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
And Hamas and the Palestinians, why were they interested? Wouldn't it have suited them to have more, civilian casualties and appeal to the world on a sympathetic level?
Well, they got a very unbalanced ceasefire. In the ceasefire, in essence, Hamas agreed to stop firing weapons, and Israel agreed that it would not take any action against Hamas if it did fire weapons, which is and also it allowed Egypt to play a greater role. So Hamas got something out of this. Why would they look? I think Hamas wants to achieve certain objectives. I don't think their first objective is killing their own citizens, although it certainly is close to the top. But I think what they want is greater recognition. They want greater recognition by the world. They want sympathy, and they got what they wanted.
What about Iran? What role did Iran play in this?
Well, Iran sponsors Hamas. Iran supports Hamas. Iran supplied Hamas with the missiles that they use, the missiles that now allow Hamas theoretically to reach even as far as Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And in fact, as you may know, there were some sirens that went off in Jerusalem. This never happened before. That missiles from the West Bank and of course Hamas showed their true colors in this. Even Saddam Hussein, when he was bombing Israel, meticulously avoided Jerusalem because of its significance to the Islamic faith. Hamas they are Islamic militants, but destroying Israel and hurting Israel apparently takes precedence even to protecting other Muslims and Jerusalem.
What effect did the truce have? Is the truce having on the players? And I'll name the players I think are relevant. It's the same. It's Egypt, it's Iran, it's Hamas, it's Hezbollah as well, and Israel. What effect is this truce having on all those players?
The problem is that both Israel and Hamas tend to make decisions based on short-term rather than long-term goals. Hamas, the ceasefire serves Hamas in that it allows them to rearm themselves, and reorient themselves for the next attack. There's no question there'll be a next attack. It is a ceasefire. It's not a truce. They're absolutely committed to continuing to making life miserable for Israelis and for Israelis in the South in particular. What Israel gets out of the truce is that their citizens have a respite from having to live in bomb shelters and having to have 12 seconds to get to a bomb shelter. By the way, another issue with Hamas is they don't build bomb shelters. Hamas does not build bomb shelters for their citizens. They build bomb shelters for their leaders, and the leadership has a bomb shelter that's located underneath a hospital, which of course Israel will never bomb. So as much as they talk about caring about their citizens, they may put no effort, and it's not because they don't have money. They per capita receive the most humanitarian aid of any people on earth, and they've chosen not to use that money to protect their people.
Israel is our nation's best friend in the Middle East and a stabilizing force there. We can hardly afford to have it attacked or even possibly destroyed by terrorist organizations like Hamas or Hezbollah or the rogue government of Iran.
The rocket attacks that have taken place and may again take place are as much a threat to us as they are to Israel. Although we are half a world away, these events in the Middle East, far west of Asia, should be of great interest and concern to the people of Hawaii, and we should continue to follow them.
And now let's take a look at our ThinkTech calendar of events going forward.
ThinkTech's 4 to 5 p.m. drive time radio series on KGU 760 AM continues this week. Tune into 760 AM for great shows every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Raise your awareness on tech, energy, Asia, and more on ThinkTech Radio.
On January 24th, the Hawaii Venture Capital Association and ThinkTech will present the annual Entrepreneur of the Year and the Deal of the Year awards at a luncheon program at the Plaza Club. Sign up for these programs on hvca.org. We'll be right back to wrap up this week's edition of ThinkTech, but first we want to thank our underwriters.
Thanks to the Scheidler Family Foundation, which supports a number of educational, cultural, and charitable organizations, including ThinkTech.
Hawaiian Electric Company and its affiliates Miko on Maui and Helco on the Big Island are deeply committed to the communities they serve.
Galen Ho is a senior executive of BAE Systems, a global defense, security, and aerospace company, and CEO of CBI Polymers, a tech company in Hawaii.
The High Tech Development Corporation, the state's leading technology agency, attached to the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism.
Castle and Cook Hawaii, with a time-honored legacy that spans more than 160 years and revolves around its mission of investing in Hawaii, creating communities, and providing for the needs of our state.
Hawaii Gas, formerly the Gas Company, a Hawaii company and proponent of the Liquid Natural Gas Initiative, helping Hawaii transition to clean energy and building Hawaii's energy future. Okay, Maria, that wraps up this week's edition of ThinkTech. Remember, you can watch ThinkTech on OC16 several times every week. Can't get enough of it, just like Jay Fidel does. For additional times, check out OC16.tv.
You bet, Duke. For lots more ThinkTech videos and for underwriting and sponsorship opportunities on ThinkTech on OC16, visit thinktechhawaii.com. Be a sponsor or a volunteer and help us reach Hawaii.
I'm Duke Oishi. Thanks so much for joining us on ThinkTech. You can watch this show throughout the week and tune in next Sunday evening for our next important weekly episode. Aloha, everyone.
I'm Maria Kashem. See you next time.